What happens when mockery turns into music history in real time? Imagine standing under blinding stage lights while a world-famous singer smirks at you, strips away the safety of the group, and forces you to sing alone, not to uplift you, but to humiliate you. The crowd expects embarrassment. The judges expect failure. Even the singer expects proof that his power is absolute. But what no one expects is this: a voice so pure, so controlled, so impossibly powerful that it silences laughter, cracks egos, and hits notes the very man who tried to shame her could never reach. This is not just a story about singing. It's about underestimation, resilience, and the moment talent rises when arrogance overreaches. Welcome back to Swift Tale, the channel where powerful stories reveal hidden strength, quiet courage, and unforgettable turning points. And if this is your first time visiting Swift Tale, let me ask you, do you enjoy stories where courage defeats cruelty, where talent exposes ego, and where the underestimated rise in ways no one sees coming? If so, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who loves inspirational stories, and subscribe so you never miss a tale that leaves an impact. Today's story follows a young black girl whose love for music was never loud enough for the world to notice, until the world tried to silence her. Invited to perform alongside others, she never sought the spotlight, never demanded attention. But when a famous singer, armed with fame, applause, and an inflated ego, decided to make an example of her, he unknowingly handed her the very stage that would expose his own limitations. What began as an attempt to mock would become a moment of reckoning, not just for him, but for everyone watching. This story matters because it reflects a truth we see far too often. Talent is frequently underestimated when it doesn't fit expectations. Bias hides behind laughter. Power disguises itself as confidence, and too many gifted voices are silenced before they're ever truly heard. But sometimes, in the cruelest moments, opportunity disguises itself as humiliation. Sometimes, the very act meant to break someone becomes the spark that reveals who they truly are. As you listen, think about how many times people are judged before they're given a fair chance. Think about how often quiet confidence is mistaken for weakness. And think about how powerful it is when someone rises, not with anger, not with arrogance, but with undeniable excellence. Because when talent speaks clearly enough, mockery has nowhere to hide. This is the story of a voice that refused to tremble, a stage that became a battleground, and a lesson the world and one famous singer would never forget. Stay with me because what happens next will change everything. Before the lights, before the whispers, before the moment that would change everything, she was just a girl who loved music quietly. Not the kind of love that demanded attention or applause, but the kind that lived in late nights, in headphones turned low, in melodies hummed under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Singing was her refuge, the place where the world felt softer and more forgiving. Yet outside of that private space, her voice rarely mattered. She was often overlooked, her presence fading into the background of louder personalities and stronger egos. She had learned early how to make herself small. In classrooms, in rehearsals, in group performances, she stood slightly behind others, not because she lacked ability, but because experience had taught her that confidence wasn't always welcomed when it came from someone like her. Compliments, when they came, were subtle. Encouragement was cautious. There were always others who were chosen first, praised louder, believed in more readily. Still, she sang, because giving up her voice felt like giving up herself. At home, music was her constant companion. She practiced when the house was quiet, experimenting with notes, ranges, and harmonies she had never been taught but somehow understood. Her voice grew stronger in solitude, shaped by feeling rather than instruction. She didn't sing to impress. She sang to survive, to express what words couldn't carry. Every note held emotion, restraint, hope, and years of unspoken resilience. Yet despite all of this, she never imagined herself standing alone on a grand stage. Fame felt distant, unreachable, something reserved for people who fit a certain image, carried a certain confidence, or had the right names backing them. She had talent, but she lacked belief that the world would ever truly see it. And so, when she was invited to participate alongside others, she viewed it not as a chance to shine, but simply as an opportunity to belong. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that her quiet dedication had built something extraordinary. Beneath her humility lived a voice forged by patience, discipline, and emotional depth. A voice that didn't need permission to be powerful. A voice waiting for the moment it would no longer be ignored. He entered the room the way only the celebrated do, without needing to announce himself. Years of fame had trained people to notice him instantly, to adjust their posture, their tone, their expectations. He was a household name, a chart topper whose voice had filled arenas and whose face had become synonymous with success. Applause followed him like a reflex, and admiration had long stopped feeling special. To him, praise was no longer affirmation, it was entitlement. With success came ego, and with ego came a quiet disdain for those still climbing. He had been at the top for so long that he no longer remembered what it felt like to hope. Young singers, especially those without pedigree or polish, blurred together in his eyes, interchangeable, forgettable, replaceable. He believed talent was something that announced itself loudly, confidently, and preferably under his control. Anyone who didn't fit that mold was dismissed before being heard. He enjoyed the power dynamic. Standing on stage, holding a microphone, directing others with a glance or a word, it fed him. Moments like auditions or collaborative performances weren't about discovering talent. They were about reinforcing hierarchy. He decided who mattered. He decided who sang. And when he spoke, people listened, not because he was always right, but because his name carried weight. There was also something else beneath the surface, a fear he never acknowledged, the fear of being outshined, of being reminded that no matter how famous one becomes, there is always someone capable of something greater. To protect himself from that truth, he masked insecurity with arrogance and humor sharpened into mockery. It was easier to laugh at others than to risk being challenged by them. When his eyes passed over the group of singers, he barely noticed her. She didn't demand attention. She didn't radiate ambition to him. She looked safe, someone he could control, someone who would not disrupt the narrative he had built around himself. In his mind, she was insignificant. And that misjudgment would soon become the most unforgettable mistake of his career. The venue itself carried a weight that made hearts beat faster. Bright lights hung overhead, casting long shadows across the polished floor, while rows of seats stretched out toward an audience hungry for spectacle. Cameras were positioned carefully, angled to capture every expression, every stumble, every triumph. This was not a casual performance space. It was a place where moments became memories and mistakes became headlines. The air buzzed with anticipation, thick with the unspoken understanding that something important was about to happen. The group of singers stood together at center stage, arranged neatly but unevenly in confidence. Some smiled too wide, others avoided eye contact, each one masking nerves in their own way. Whispered encouragement passed between them, though fear lingered beneath every word. They all knew the stakes. Sharing the stage with a famous singer wasn't just an opportunity, it was a test. One wrong note could follow them for years, while one extraordinary moment could change everything. She stood slightly apart, not physically separated, but emotionally distant. Her hands were steady, her breathing slow, yet her mind raced. The lights felt hotter from where she stood, the silence louder. She reminded herself to blend in, to follow cues, to avoid drawing attention. This wasn't her moment, or so she believed. She had prepared to be part of the chorus, a voice within many, safe in anonymity. The famous singer stepped forward, microphone in hand, commanding the room with practiced ease. His presence shifted the energy instantly. Conversations stopped, movement stilled. He surveyed the group with an expression that blended amusement and authority, as though deciding which piece on a chessboard he might move first. His smile was thin, deliberate, and unsettling. Then he spoke, not to uplift, not to encourage, but to assert control. His words, casual on the surface, carried an edge that made the singers exchange uneasy glances. The stage, once a shared space of possibility, transformed into something sharper, more dangerous. Power had chosen its position. And in that moment, as the lights burned brighter and the audience leaned in, the stage became more than a platform. It became a proving ground. It happened quickly, almost casually, the way cruelty often does when it knows it won't be challenged. The famous singer let his gaze drift across the group, lingering just long enough to make the silence uncomfortable. Then, with a half-smile and a tone that sounded playful to anyone not listening closely, he singled her out. His words cut through the air, light on the surface but heavy underneath, suggesting she stepped forward, alone. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, uncertain whether this was encouragement or something else entirely. Her heart dropped. She felt the sudden weight of dozens of eyes turned toward her, the warmth of the stage lights intensifying as if exposing something she had tried hard to protect. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't rehearsed. She searched his face for reassurance and found none, only amusement. The safety of the group vanished in an instant, replaced by the terrifying vulnerability of isolation. He framed it as a challenge, but the edge in his voice told a different story. This wasn't about giving her a chance. It was about control, about reminding everyone who stood above whom. The pause that followed stretched painfully long as she hesitated, unsure whether refusing would make things worse. Around her, some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few, embarrassing amusement. The imbalance of power was unmistakable. As she stepped forward, the laughter softened into whispers. The singer leaned back slightly, confident, relaxed, as though already certain of the outcome. To him, this was entertainment, a demonstration, a way to reinforce the hierarchy he believed in so deeply. He expected nerves, maybe a cracked note, something small he could magnify into proof that his instincts were right. But standing there, microphone trembling just slightly in her hand, she felt something unexpected stir beneath the fear. Not anger, not resentment. Resolve, years of being overlooked, of being underestimated, pressed quietly against her chest. This moment, cruel as it was, had stripped away every place to hide. The room fell silent. The spotlight narrowed. And just before she opened her mouth, everyone believed they already knew how this would end. Time seemed to slow as she stood alone at the center of the stage, the silence pressing in from every direction. The microphone felt heavier than it should have, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. In that suspended moment, doubt rushed in first, whispers of past dismissals, side glances, and opportunities that never came. Her mind replayed every time she had been told, directly or indirectly, that she wasn't enough, that her voice was safer kept quiet. Fear tightened her chest, urging her to shrink back, to apologize for existing in a space that suddenly felt hostile. But then something shifted. Beneath the fear, a steadier presence emerged, the countless hours she had spent practicing alone, the songs that had carried her through loneliness, the discipline forged in silence. She remembered why she sang in the first place, not for approval, not for validation, but because music was the one place she felt honest and whole. If this was going to be her moment, she decided, it would be on her terms, not as a joke, not as an example, but as truth. She lifted her head, grounding herself with a slow breath. The murmurs faded into background noise as she focused inward, finding the center of her voice. This was no longer about the famous singer or the audience or the laughter that had preceded her. It was about claiming the space she had been pushed into and refusing to be diminished by it. In choosing to sing, she wasn't just responding to a challenge, she was reclaiming her dignity. And in that choice, something powerful happened. The fear didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling her. The doubt didn't vanish, but it no longer defined her. She stood taller, steadier, ready to let her voice speak where words had failed her for so long. Then, with one final breath, she opened her mouth. And the moment the world had tried to turn against her became the moment she finally turned toward herself. The sound that emerged was soft at first, almost cautious, as if testing the air before fully stepping into it. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was pure. The first note floated through the room with a clarity that cut through the tension like light through fog. Conversations stopped mid-breath. Smiles froze. The room leaned in without realizing it. Something about her tone demanded attention, not because it begged for it, but because it earned it. As she continued, her voice began to unfold, revealing layers of control and emotion that no one had anticipated. Each phrase carried intention, shaped by feeling rather than performance. She didn't rush. She let the notes breathe, allowing silence to work in her favor. What had moments earlier felt like a setup for embarrassment now felt intimate, almost sacred. The audience wasn't watching anymore, they were listening. The famous singer's posture shifted. The casual lean gave way to stillness. His amused expression tightened, replaced by something closer to disbelief. This wasn't what he had expected. This wasn't nerves or uncertainty or failure. This was presence, And presence, he knew, could not be taught or faked. It was something you either had or you didn't. With every line she sang, confidence settled deeper into her body. The tremor in her hands disappeared. Her voice grew stronger, richer, filling the space effortlessly. It carried pain, hope, restraint, and strength all at once. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was telling a story, and the room was helpless but to follow. By the time she reached the end of the first passage, the silence that followed was no longer uncomfortable. It was reverent, the kind of silence that follows something unexpectedly beautiful, something undeniable. And in that stillness, one truth became clear. This was no longer a joke. This was no longer control. This was the beginning of something no one in that room had prepared for. As the song moved forward, something extraordinary began to happen. She didn't just sing louder or higher for effect. She ascended with precision, control, and purpose. Her voice climbed effortlessly into ranges that demanded not only technical mastery, but emotional fearlessness. The notes were clean, resonant, and unwavering, carrying a strength that stunned even trained ears. It was the kind of vocal command that couldn't be manufactured in studios or corrected in post-production. This was raw ability, honed in silence, unleashed without warning. The audience felt it before they understood it. A collective inhale swept through the room as she reached a sustained high note, holding it with calm authority. There was no strain, no break, no desperation, only control. It wasn't just impressive, it was humbling. Some people instinctively glanced toward the famous singer, measuring his reaction against the sound filling the room. He remained frozen, jaw tight, eyes fixed on her as the reality settled in. These were notes he had avoided his entire career. Notes he had built his reputation around pretending did matter. She transitioned seamlessly, descending and rising again, playing with dynamics in a way that revealed deep musical intelligence. Power gave way to softness, softness bloomed back into strength. Each shift felt intentional, confident, and fearless. What had begun as an act meant to expose her now exposed something else entirely, the limitations of the man who had tried to mock her. The crowd was no longer restrained. Gasps turned into murmurs, murmurs into disbelief. People leaned forward, eyes wide, some with hands covering their mouths. They weren't witnessing a performance anymore, they were witnessing a moment. The kind that rewrites narratives and rearranges hierarchies. And as she reached the final impossible note, clear, sustained, unflinching, it became undeniable. This was not luck. This was not a fluke. This was a voice shaped by discipline, courage, and truth. The stage had chosen its star. And it wasn't the one anyone expected. The silence that followed her final note was unlike anything that had come before it. It wasn't awkward or uncertain, it was stunned. For a brief moment, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the room itself needed time to catch up with what had just happened. Then the applause began, hesitant at first, almost disbelieving, before surging forward in a wave that filled every corner of the venue. People rose from their seats without thinking, clapping not out of politeness, but out of awe. Faces that had once held curiosity or amusement now showed something closer to reverence. Judges exchanged glances, shaking their heads in quiet disbelief. Cameras swung back toward her, desperate to capture the expression of a girl who had just rewritten her own story. And then there were the whispers, soft, urgent, unstoppable. Who is she? Where has she been hiding? How did no one see this coming? The famous singer stood rigid, applause echoing around him like an accusation. The power he had wielded so casually minutes earlier had slipped through his fingers. His role had shifted from authority to bystander, from judge to comparison. Every cheer for her felt like a verdict he hadn't anticipated. He tried to mask it with a controlled expression, but the truth was written plainly in his eyes. He had miscalculated. The audience no longer looked to him for approval. Their attention belonged entirely to her now, the girl he had tried to embarrass, the voice he had underestimated. The hierarchy he relied on had inverted in a matter of seconds, and there was no way to undo it, no joke to soften it, no comment to regain control. In that moment, the room made its choice. It chose authenticity over arrogance, talent over ego. The voice that had once been ignored over a name that had been praised for far too long. As the applause finally began to fade, The weight of what had just happened settled over the room like a truth no one could deny. What was meant to be mockery had transformed into a moment of undeniable triumph. The girl stood there, breathing steadily, her expression calm, not because she wasn't overwhelmed, but because she had finally been heard. She hadn't needed to argue, protest, or demand respect. Her voice had done all of that for her. In a single performance, she dismantled arrogance, challenged bias, and reminded everyone present that true talent doesn't announce itself with ego, it reveals itself with excellence. The famous singer offered restrained praise, words carefully chosen, but the shift was irreversible. The balance of power had changed, and everyone felt it. This was no longer his stage alone. It was a shared space where humility had been forced into the spotlight and where an underestimated voice had claimed its place without apology. What lingered wasn't embarrassment, it was realization. Realization that greatness can come from the quietest corners, and that mockery often exposes the insecurity of the one who delivers it. This story matters because it reflects something universal. Too often, people are judged before they're given a fair chance. Too often, confidence is mistaken for arrogance, and silence is mistaken for weakness. But moments like this remind us that preparation meets opportunity in unexpected ways, and when it does, the results can be transformative. Talent doesn't need permission, it only needs space. In the hours and days that followed, the moment replayed itself far beyond the walls of the venue. Clips circulated rapidly, dissected frame by frame, note by note. What began as a quiet attempt at mockery became a public reckoning. Viewers noticed the shift in the famous singer's expression, the hesitation in his body language, the way control slipped from him as the performance unfolded. For the first time in years, the narrative surrounding him wasn't about his achievements, it was about his misjudgment. Industry insiders whispered what many had long suspected, that his reputation had been padded by power rather than humility. Interviews resurfaced, old moments were re-examined, patterns people once ignored now felt impossible to unsee. The incident didn't destroy his career overnight, but it cracked the image he had carefully maintained. Invitations became more selective, praise more cautious. People listened differently now, not just to his voice, but to his character. Privately, the impact cut deeper. The certainty he carried about his dominance, his untouchability was shaken. Being outperformed was one thing, being outperformed after trying to humiliate someone was another. The silence that followed the applause haunted him more than any criticism. It forced a confrontation with a truth he had avoided for years. Talent exists beyond status, and respect cannot be demanded without consequence. Some saw his later attempts at humility as growth. Others saw them as damage control. Either way, the moment had changed him. It reminded him, and the world, that fame does not equal superiority, and that every stage carries the risk of being reminded why it exists in the first place. The spotlight he once controlled so effortlessly had turned on him. And this time there was no one else to overshadow. For her, everything changed, but not all at once, and not in the way people might expect. The applause faded, the lights dimmed, and the stage eventually emptied, yet something irreversible had taken root. She walked away not just with recognition, but with a new understanding of herself. The girl who once tried to stay invisible had proven, both to the world and to herself, that her voice belonged anywhere it chose to exist. Confidence, once fragile and quiet, began to settle into her bones. Opportunities followed, invitations to collaborate, to audition, to be heard rather than overlooked. People who had never noticed her before now listened closely, eager to understand the depth behind the performance that stunned them. But what set her apart wasn't just vocal ability, it was authenticity. She didn't rush to imitate trends or reshape herself to fit expectations. She sang the way she always had, grounded in emotion and truth, refusing to dilute the very thing that had carried her through. Her growth wasn't driven by validation alone. She remained reflective, careful not to let sudden praise erase the years of quiet resilience that shaped her. Those lonely hours of practice, the moments of doubt, the patience she cultivated when no one was watching, they became her foundation. Success didn't change her values, it clarified them. She understood now that her voice had power not because it impressed, but because it connected. Perhaps most importantly, she became a symbol for others like her, those who had talent but lacked visibility, confidence, or permission. Without trying to, she represented possibility, proof that being underestimated does not diminish potential and that silence can one day give way to resonance. Her journey had only just begun. But one thing was already clear. She would never again question whether her voice deserved to be heard. Beyond the applause, the headlines, and the viral clips, the story struck a deeper chord because it reflected a pattern far larger than a single stage. It exposed how often talent is filtered through bias, how assumptions about appearance, background, or confidence can blind people to extraordinary ability. The girl wasn't overlooked because she lacked skill. She was overlooked because she didn't fit the image many expected greatness to wear. And that truth resonated with countless viewers who had experienced the same quiet dismissal in classrooms, workplaces, and creative spaces. The incident also forced an uncomfortable conversation about power and gatekeeping. The famous singer represented an industry that often rewards ego over empathy, dominance over discovery. His attempt to humiliate her wasn't just personal. It was symbolic of systems that test people harshly instead of nurturing them, that confuse intimidation with mentorship. When she succeeded despite that pressure, it challenged the very structure that allowed such behavior to exist unchecked. At the same time, her response offered a powerful counter-narrative. She didn't lash out. She didn't argue or demand fairness. She let excellence speak. In doing so, she demonstrated that while talent should never have to fight for dignity, when it does, it can become a force that reshapes perception. Her performance became a reminder that resilience doesn't always look loud or defiant. Sometimes it looks like focus, preparation, and courage under fire. For many watching, the story became personal. It reminded them of moments they were underestimated, silenced, or put on the spot unfairly. It raised questions about how often society rewards confidence over competence, and how many brilliant voices remain unheard simply because no one gives them space. In that sense, this wasn't just her victory. It was a mirror. And in that mirror, countless people saw both the harm of arrogance and the quiet, unstoppable power of being prepared when the moment finally arrives. This story lingers because it feels familiar. Not everyone has stood on a stage, but many have stood in moments where they were underestimated, dismissed, or quietly judged before being given a fair chance. It speaks to the times when confidence was mistaken for arrogance, when silence was mistaken for weakness, and when potential was overlooked simply because it didn't announce itself loudly. The girl's journey reminds us that greatness doesn't always arrive with noise. It often grows in patience, discipline, and unseen effort. It also challenges us to reflect on our own roles. Are we the ones who underestimate, who laugh too quickly, who confuse authority with superiority? Or are we the ones holding back, doubting ourselves because the world hasn't validated what we carry inside? This moment invites both humility and courage. Humility to recognize talent wherever it exists, and courage to trust your own abilities even when others don't. Her response teaches an important truth. Your best answer to disrespect doesn't have to be confrontation. Sometimes it's excellence. Sometimes it's preparation meeting opportunity. When you focus on mastering your craft instead of proving yourself, the results speak louder than explanations ever could. The stage she was pushed onto became the space where her voice finally aligned with her worth. Long after the lights dimmed and the applause faded, the moment remained, etched not just in memory, but in meaning. What began as an attempt to humiliate became a defining reminder that true talent cannot be mocked into silence. The girl didn't walk away as a victim of arrogance. She walked away as proof that preparation, patience, and authenticity can overturn even the most unbalanced power dynamics. Her voice became more than sound, it became a statement. The famous singer, once so certain of his authority, was left with a lesson that no award or accolade could soften. Fame may command attention, but it does not guarantee relevance. Ego may dominate a room, but it cannot withstand genuine excellence. In that brief exchange, the stage reclaimed its purpose, not as a place for dominance, but as a space where truth is revealed and merit speaks for itself. For the girl, the legacy was deeply personal. She no longer needed permission to believe in herself. The doubts that once kept her quiet lost their hold, replaced by an understanding that her voice had always been enough. That moment didn't create her talent, it revealed it to the world and, more importantly, to herself. This story endures because it reflects a universal truth. The underestimated are often the most powerful when finally heard. And when opportunity meets readiness, no amount of mockery can stop what follows. Thank you for spending this time with Swift Tale, where quiet strength meets unforgettable moments. If this story moved you, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Because somewhere right now, a voice is waiting, just like hers, for the moment it finally gets to be heard.